I would say it was a pretty safe bet that the one magic wish most people would like to be granted would be to be able to see into the future. I mean, think what it would mean, backing the right horse. But we can't. We have to guess about tomorrow, and we have to act on that guess, and it's never been any different. And that's why following the trail from the past up to the emergence of the modern technology that surrounds us in our daily lives and affects our lives is rather like a detective story. Because at no time in the past did anybody who had anything to do with the business of inventing or changing things ever know what the full effects of his actions would be. He just went ahead and did what he did for his own reasons, like we do. That's how change comes about. And it's like a detective story because if you follow the trail from the past up to a modern man-made object, the story is full of sudden twists and false clues and guesswork. And you never know where the story is heading until the very last minute. This detective story starts in the Eastern Mediterranean, about 2,500 years ago. And it starts with a subject dear to most people's hearts, money. And because that's the way things go in history, it will end, as will all these programs, with something totally different. In this case, a modern-day invention that affects the life of every man, woman and child on Earth. Take yourself back, then, to a time when the Mediterranean was practically empty, when the ancient Greeks had only just turned up, and together with the Phoenicians and the Egyptians were about all there was, living in cities we would call villages. When, if you wanted to trade with somebody, it was a case of meet me in the market square and I'll give you my vegetables if you give me your cloth. You bartered because there was no such thing as cash. And the reason we've come looking for clues in this particular city on the Mediterranean has to do with how cash was invented and what happened as a result. The way it happened shows how change comes as much as anything by accident. Sometime around 700 BC, in a place called Lydia, what is now modern Turkey, there was a river that washed gold down from the local mountains. And the local people used to pan it and melt it down for religious objects, jewelry, that kind of stuff. And then, in the riverbed, somebody came across this. It's called a touchstone. And if you rub gold onto it, you get a streak. But if you rub gold mixed with silver or something else, you get a different kind of streak. See what that means? If that streak is pure gold, and somebody's trying to offload garbage onto you, well, you take what he calls gold and you rub it on the touchstone and you can see immediately that what he says is gold isn't up to your standard. Well, the Lydians went immediately into the business of standardizing their precious metals, and over the next 300 years or so, all over the Eastern Mediterranean and in Persia, the habit spread of accepting metal instead of goods as payment, because now you could trust the value of the metal. After that point, in any state or empire that had a mint making coins, the new money really stimulated trade. By the time Alexander the Great was running everything from India to Italy, his coinage was accepted everywhere, and his world was like one giant marketplace. Well, in 331 BC, he decided to build a big commercial centre to handle the flood of goods crisscrossing his empire. This was it, named after him, Alexandria. You could do two things here: get very rich and get yourself the best education in the world. You see, Alexandria had a library. And what a library. Its opening hours went on for maybe 1,000 years. At its height, it had more than 500,000 books. And that was it. I mean, if it wasn't here, it wasn't worth knowing about. And then in the end, somebody burnt every single book. Nobody knows who. Fanatical Christians, fanatical Arabs. Take your pick. Religion at work. Left nothing. Well, almost nothing. Because the next clue in this particular historical detective story takes us down a hole. Of course, this was no ordinary hole. It led down to a kind of extra backup library. And since it wasn't above ground to be destroyed, it's still here. It's a real honeycomb of tunnels down here, like a literary rabbit warren. Now, all the books were stored and catalogued, just like we do today, according to subject heading, and placed in niches like these. Of course, being a big seaport, the main interest was in nautical things like maps, geography books, aids to navigation, that sort of thing. And they were all written in ink on papyrus made from slivers of reed stuck flat together, and they came out like this in the form of scrolls. Now, they got these scrolls either because the local scholars wrote them, or because they had a rather crafty law. You see, if you came to Alexandria on a boat and you owned a book, you had to lend it to the library to be copied. And sometimes the copies were so good, the owners went off with the fakes and the library kept the original. This is a copy of one of the library's bestsellers. Author Claudius Ptolemy, title, All You Ever Wanted to Know About Calculation. 13 volumes, all the astronomy that was known at the time. One of the volumes was a star catalogue containing 1,022 stars. Look. Here's the name of the star. Here's the zodiac sign it's in, Gemini, Sagittarius. Here's where it is in that zodiac. Is it northern or southern hemisphere? How many degrees east or west on the sky is it? And how bright is it? Ptolemy did these squiggles about 150 AD. And they're one of the great examples of an idea ahead of its time. Because one of the ways this was to be used by sailors to open up the world, in a way you're going to see happening later in this program, wasn't going to come for over 1,400 years. And as for the sailors pouring in and out of Alexandria in Ptolemy's time, well, they just weren't interested in charts of the sky. Some sailing astronomers might have used them in order to find out their position. Because, you see, if the tables told you that at a certain time a star should be in that position in the sky, and you actually saw it in that position, you could work backwards, so to speak, to find out what position you'd have to be in order to see it at that different angle. But the sailors stuck to their maps and their winds. Because from the very beginning, they'd used ships with a kind of sail that makes it hard to get into serious navigational problems. A square sail that only takes you the way the wind's blowing, which is what they did right through the Roman period with bigger ships and richer cargoes. Until suddenly, around 700 AD, the newly arrived Arab pirates gave one simple order. Open your wallet and repeat after me, help yourself. You didn't, they took it anyway. It became clear to even the dumbest merchant that the quickest way to lose a fortune was to put it all in one big fat cargo ship so the Arabs could take the lot. Everybody started spreading the risk in smaller ships, less to be plundered in one go. That switch to the use of smaller ships brought into general use something that would help Europeans colonize America centuries later. The very earliest picture we have of it comes from a manuscript written in the 9th century in Byzantium. It was a sail, the kind of sail that had previously only been used on smaller ships, and the kind of sail that you can find on a modern Arab dhow like this one today. Look at the shape. It's triangular. Now that is a lateen sail, and what you could do with the lateen sail was something you could never have done with the old Roman square sail. Look, suppose the wind is coming in this direction. With the lateen sail, you can sail in any direction right up until you're almost sailing against the wind on either side of it. So on a long journey, they would go take the wind from this side, then they would tack and take the wind from this side, then they would tack again and take the wind again from this side. Mind you, it wasn't something they enjoyed doing too much. I mean, look what it involves. Apart from the fact that with the ton of tackle you needed and a lot more crew to handle it, the worst bit came when the ship was just about to cross the wind, at which point you had to lift the spar right over the top of the mast. And doing that in rough weather was no picnic. Still, it was a lot better than going in the wrong direction. Now, if you're not a sailing buff, you may not be turned on by the lateen sail. But as you'll see, it means a great deal more to you than you might think. See, although it was nice to be able to zigzag everywhere, sailing like that wasn't the only thing that happened because of this canvas triangle. The lateen sail permitted one other thing. With it, you could leave port pretty well when you wanted to, without having to wait for a wind that was going in the same direction you were. Now, that meant you would leave port more often. That meant there was more cargo on the move, more trade, more prosperity. It's probable that the Arabs introduced the lateen sail into Western Europe just about in time to play a major role in the recovery of the European economy after the chaos and confusion of the so-called Dark Ages. However, by about 1200, there was so much bulk cargo, like grain or crusaders going to the Holy Land, so much bulk cargo on the move that the ships had got very much bigger. And then they ran into another problem, the problem of steering. You see, up until that point, you steered with a couple of oars, one off either side of the stern. But by about 1200, the ships were so big that those oars just really weren't feasible anymore, which was why they probably picked up an idea from the Chinese that solved the problem. This, the stern-post rudder. With the stern-post rudder, you could handle a ship of almost any size in almost any sea condition. So, by the 13th century, the Europeans had all the technology, the lateen sail, the old square sail, the stern-post rudder, to go anywhere they wanted to. They didn't need to use it until 1453, when Constantinople fell to the Turks. And after that, it was, if you wanted something from the Far East, it was either pay the price the Turks wanted for letting it come through their territory, or go get it yourself, which is just what the Europeans did in the great 16th century voyages of discovery.